Well, good morning, everybody. Great to be with all of you today, joined virtually, those of you who are watching live and those of you who will watch this later as we talk about, I know, a topic that is pressing and on the minds of lots of parents and communities all across the state here, reopening schools safely this fall. As the immortal June Carter Cash said, time's a-wasting, so I want to get right into this. I'm joined by three outstanding panelists. We have Dr. Susan Pendergrass, who's the Director of Research and Education Policy at the Show Me Institute, Senator Cindy O'Laughlin, who serves Missouri's 18th Senatorial District, and Representative Chuck Basye, who represents the fightin' 47th District in the Missouri House of Representatives. So, pardon the pun at the beginning here, but I'd like to sort of start by taking a temperature check. So where are we as we look at the K-12 education system in Missouri? It's been buffeted by several different things, whether it was the coronavirus itself, the economic devastation that the coronavirus has wrought, and all of the other issues that don't take a pause just because there's a global pandemic. So I'd love to know, maybe we'll start with Senator O'Laughlin. As you look at the landscape of Missouri's education system right now, what do you see?
Well, I mean, I think you see a couple things. In the more rural area, you are more likely to find schools who are preparing to open just as they normally would. They do have in place some different methods for people who may feel they have underlying health conditions or whatever. Some of them have made some efforts to keep people a little bit socially distanced and a few minor things like that, but I think that they're preparing to open and wanting to open as usual. I did speak to a superintendent just before I came this morning. They are having summer school, and they have a good school. It's in my area. They get good outcomes. They're accountable. And, you know, she was very concerned that any of the schools would consider not opening as usual. The in-class time just can't really be replaced by online learning. I know in the more urban areas, where there's more of an alarmist type atmosphere, there are teachers that don't want to come back. And of course, there's students and parents who are very concerned. And I see that Basye has decided to allow people to basically change the way they account for attendance. So, you know, I'm pretty concerned about that.
Sure, Representative Basye, I'd love to see you. Obviously, you have what appears to be a beautiful vantage point of the great state of Missouri today. But I'd love to know, as you look at the education system, what do you see?
Well, it's very much what the senator said. However, I did find a very interesting dynamic where my wife works. She's an employee with the Columbia Public Schools, and she's at one of the middle schools, and her principal sent a survey out, an informal survey to the parents. And over 80% of the parents opted for in-school, return to in-school classroom activities. And so I thought it was pretty interesting, being that's in Columbia. Now, the rural districts, as Senator O'Laughlin said, they're kind of leaning towards going back as normally as possible, with some considerations to people that might have underlying health issues, and I think that's very appropriate. So I think the kids will be pretty resilient with this virus. It's a very serious issue for sure, but my concerns are with some staff members as well, not just the teachers, but the people that work in the office, the custodians, things like that. So they need to make considerations for all those people. But I think if they do it pretty much as a business does, maybe not mandate a mask, but suggest wearing a mask and the 6 feet apart and all that. The hygiene is very important. I think they'll get by just fine.
Great. Dr. Pendergrass, what do you see?
Well, having been once the shutdown started, my team and I started looking pretty carefully on what all the 550 districts in Missouri did or are doing. And we went to their web pages, went to the Facebook pages. We started reading Facebook feeds to see who was passing out packets, who was just pointing to, parents into the direction of resources. And what I think happened is it definitely exposed areas of the state where either we don't have enough high-speed internet access, or we don't have the skills to pivot to virtual education in the way that a lot of the urban districts and the suburban districts could. And I guess my concern for going back in the fall is, that's great. We just say, well, just YOLO and open as usual. And then somebody gets sick or tests positive, a teacher, let's say, and what happened past spring was if that happened, they closed it back down again. So before the statewide shutdown. So then they closed down again. So then you have kids in districts that aren't able to, produce a high quality virtual educational experience because of course, there's not going to be 550 of those across the state, of course. And I guess my concern is more like making sure parents can access something else in that situation. We have Basye has 10 approved virtual providers that parents could enroll their kids in right now if they weren't sure about what their district was doing. But that takes that can be a 30-day process because they have to ask for permission. And so I guess my concern is fixing a couple things immediately, perhaps a special session that the governor could call. I think there's going to be one. I'd like to hear from these two more about that. But a couple things like letting parents immediately access MOCAP if they think that that's right for them and they want to do that now without asking permission. And also for parents who have found that the in-person's not going to work and they're not satisfied with MOCAP, giving them the opportunity to find a different safe environment for their kids. And that could be a safe private school in-person environment if that's what they want, or that could be a hybrid or something virtual. But parents were in control last spring. The state kind of punted to the districts. The district said, we'll let the schools figure it out. And then a lot of schools were like, we'll let each teacher figure it out, which then sort of put it in the hands of parents, and parents are in the driver's seat. And I think going forward, I would love to see some legislative changes that sort of keep parents in the driver's seat so that they can continue to use what they experienced last spring to look for what's right for their kid.
Yeah, it sounds to me from a lot of the answers that all three of you just gave is that as we look to the fall, flexibility is going to be important, whether that's flexibility within schools, flexibilities within districts, just as different things happen in different places, as parents have different preferences, as the virus impacts people differently, right? So my question from the sort of policy side, there's obviously the practice side, which we can ask teachers and principals about, how to operate their schools best. But if I think from the policy side, so Susan, you brought up there some of the stuff around MOCAP, which is interesting. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear perhaps Senator O'Loughlin, if you wanted to start, what are maybe some policy things that can happen to give schools and families the flexibility that they'll need in this sort of quote unquote new normal?
Well, I think everybody who is watching this understands how the public system feels about options. They're not very open to that. And if students, which I'm fully for, if their parents want to send them somewhere else, then of course you're going to have the funding issue because attendance drives funding. I'm very willing to bring that up and work for those options to be implemented, but I can assure you it will be an uphill battle. Just the option of being able to learn online has been fought by many of our schools already, and for various reasons. But I think basically just because they feel threatened that if enough people did that, financially it will hurt them. And that's just reality.
Well, I
Representative
understand
Basye,
that.
oh no, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say in terms of the changes to the attendance law, I understand that the way the law has been written is that if you can't use the 2020, 2021 attendance, you can use last year's attendance or even the year before if that's better for you. So I'm wondering, does that then mean that if parents choose something else, or if we were able to give what I personally am calling Learn Safely scholarships to parents, wouldn't those kids still be counted in their home district for at least another year?
You would be right about that. But then you still have the question of how, if you go into a private school, how will that be paid for? And as you mentioned, maybe the Learn Safely scholarship, which I think would be great. And, there would probably be parents who would support that for a lot of reasons, but one being it's generally a smaller venue, and they would think less risk of being exposed. So I think that would be great.
So there's obviously, Senator O'Loughlin, you brought up this great question about money, right? This is all of the things that we're talking about here cost money. We see the budget just from decreased tax revenue and others is an issue. So what does that look like going forward? How does that affect the types of things that we'd like to see? Maybe Representative Basye, if you wanted to take that one as you sort of as you look at the budget and what the implications for that are.
Well, that's a very good point. I think that's going to change quite a bit as we go forward. You know, when people start paying their taxes, me included, in the next couple of weeks, I think the revenue should start coming in a little better. But you know, we're all facing the same thing. You know, the budget shortfalls and all that. I think the governor's doing a pretty good job considering what is happening. But like Senator Laughlin said, we are going to be fought on any kind of options for parents. The public school lobby is very strong. They don't want any choices. They want it to be public schools and nothing else. That's been my experience for the 6 years I've been in the legislature, and I don't think that's going to change. But I think now is a good opportunity for us to try and push some type of choice for our students and our parents. And hopefully the governor will call a special session on that. I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything about any kind of an educational special session, but I think that would be a great thing to try and tackle in the next few weeks.
We have a viewer question about counting and charter schools. So when it comes to how these counts work, do we know how the charter school students will be counted for attendance? I believe that's the question, was around the sort of new attendance rules and how charter schools play into that.
Charter schools are public schools, so I don't know why it would be any different. To me, it would be the very same as any other school.
I don't think, though, that they get that hold harmless provision of using last year or the year before. I believe that only applies to traditional public school districts and not to charter schools. So I think there is some concern on the part of charter schools. I mean, look, lots of people would love to have a special session to fix the one or two things that they most want fixed this fall, right? And I think for the charter schools, that's one thing, is that they will have to have kids in seats to count their attendance based on that new rule, which I think is 2 days a week, but they don't get that hold harmless provision. That would be an important thing to fix too.
So
I totally,
go ahead.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So I'd like to ask about accountability, right? So as we fan out into our homes and schools and all of these different things happening, how do we know that schools are providing what they need to be providing? How do we know that kids are actually getting access to a quality education? Representative Basye, yeah, please.
Yeah, I can use this through my own perspective. We have 3 grandchildren that stay with us quite a bit. And when Columbia shut down, they were, it seemed like they weren't getting a whole lot of instructions from the teachers. I'm not faulting them because I think they're trying to do the right thing. But I'll use my 5th grade granddaughter as an example. She would have a bi-weekly, I think it was twice a week, a conversation through Zoom with her teacher. And they would make assignments, and it would be maybe no more than an hour, and then the kids were on their own. So we had to work through that. The same thing with my grandson, who is a 6th grader, be a 7th grader this year, and then I have a high school granddaughter as well, and they all operated the same way. Just a very brief conversation with a teacher, just maybe once or twice a week, and assignments were made, and everything was submitted online through a medium that Columbia Public Schools were using.
And it seems to me that there's, everybody, I think exactly to your point, which schools were reeling. This kind of came out of nowhere. People didn't know exactly what to do. So giving some grace and understanding to educators, I think, is really important. My guess is that maybe people will cast a bit more critical eye as we come back to the fall, as schools have had more time and ability to prepare for these things. But Susan, I'd be interested in sort of your look at all of this.
Well, both from the perspective of wanting good policy in Missouri and from the perspective of a researcher. As you know, in the 18-19 school year, we got the first set of test scores that could be compared to the year before for the last 6 or 7 years. Tests have been changed, I think, 4 times in 5 years. But all of a sudden in 18-19, they're like, here's the first set we can compare to the year before. That's out the door because there was no testing in 1920. We're going to pick it up in 2021, I imagine. But then I think there'll be a lot of like, well, we can't compare these anymore because of the shutdown, the pandemic, and kids weren't all in school. So I feel like there's going to be another year of like kind of excuses over knowing which schools are doing well and which schools are not. So personally, one thing that I think DESE and or the legislature would be well put to do is to have some sort of a rating system for our schools like so many other states do, whether it's colors or letter grades or stars like Nevada, but some way of holding schools accountable. Because I know now we're just going to have another set of excuses. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but now it's going to be 21-22 where we can maybe compare to 18-19. And I can tell you from a national perspective, Missouri's slipping. There is one national exam given every 2 years from the U.S. Department of Education. And from the late 90s, when Missouri fourth graders were in like 15th to 20th in reading and math, we're 34th now. And states are leapfrogging over us. Yeah, Florida's gone from like 45th and 46th to 4th and 6th. So states are leapfrogging over us. Even if our scores are going up or they're flat, what we may not realize is that other states are increasing and leapfrogging over us. So to wait another 2 years to even know how we're doing is what troubles me a lot.
Is there a way for us to get that information from you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd be happy
Yes,
to do
if
that
you
too.
would send that to me. I mean, I think in education, it's very hard for people to get any kind of accurate information. It's a real frustration of mine. I think that we have some good schools out there and people doing some good things.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then we also have the opposite, just like you would in any other career type. But the testing and the way schools are rated, all of those things don't really give you an accurate indication of where students are and where their level of learning is. It's very frustrating, and it's something that I'd like to change sooner rather than later.
We certainly have fully accredited districts that have schools with single-digit rates of proficiency. So you've got like 3 and 4% of students are proficient, but the district's fully accredited. And that to me, that's a problem. And this pandemic has just exacerbated that problem.
Yes.
So interesting that Joel brings this up. And by the way, those of you that are watching this, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your little Zoom screen if you want to submit questions. People have already been doing that, but I want to make that available to everyone. Feel free to send those in, and I will do my best to get them in. So it's a serendipity that we were talking about rating systems and data, because a question came in over the transom here that says, when you look at the performance of DESE from the onset of the stay-at-home orders, what grade would you give it? And as a follow-up question, what would you change if you were in charge? So put on your teacher hats, and DESE is your student. What grade would you give DESE, and what would you change if you were in charge?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I hate to pile on DESE because of the pandemic, because it's been difficult on all of us. But I would say that DESE has a lot of room to improve. I think their website is just very, very difficult to navigate through. It's hard to find information. A couple of years ago, you could go and you could find a spreadsheet for not only school districts, but school buildings within each district that had their APR scores, and all the variables were easily accessible in that. They did away with that. Now it's very, very hard to go in and compare school buildings and school districts. And I wish they would change that, go back to the way that they had it a few years ago. But I think their website is one of the worst I've tried to navigate through, and I wish they would do a better job in that. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Well, I'd give them a D. And Chuck is laughing. Not because I don't think they're capable of doing what needs to be done, but I'm not sure that they want to hold themselves accountable to what needs to be done. I mean, Basye has, I've looked at their organizational chart, I've looked at the amount of money that we're investing in the people that are in Basye, and I'm wondering to myself, why do we have such a massive investment and we're getting such poor outcomes? I mean, I feel like the virus has created an atmosphere too, where everybody's on a Zoom phone call. So like when the state board meets, you know, it's a Zoom call, no one can get in there. I've wanted to meet with the commissioner a couple of times, and they wanted to just have a phone call. So I think what's happening is it's sort of a disjointed effort. The School Board Association, which I assume works fairly closely with Basye, put out their rules for reopening, and they were absurd. I mean, they were just absurd. There would be no way a school could follow those recommendations they had. So I feel like we have a very large bureaucracy, and it is filled with authority for school districts, but the school districts have all the responsibility. So when you have someone with all the responsibility, but they have no authority, that system never works well, because the people that are responsible feel they have no voice in the outcome. So I would like to see a lot more transparency. I would like to, as they say, local control. There is no local control. I would like to work on that aspect and free up our schools, because most of them do have some measure of common sense. But overall, I'd give them a D.
So my perspective is I started looking at the other 50 state Department of Education websites just to see what other states were doing, because Basye has some resources. They have some information on finance, and they post administrative memos, but no real if I'm a small school district, what should I be doing today? And I would just say, if you're interested, look at Nebraska's Department of Education website. They created something called Nebraska Launch, and it's a whole website. And it's like here, and it divides it up into like governance and operations and finance. And then you click on those, and it's like, here's what a district leader should be doing today. Here's what a school leader should be doing today. Appoint someone to be the point person on operate, like concrete steps. Like if you don't know what to do to reopen, do all these steps and think about these things, and reach out to parents once a week, whatever, and how to communicate. And it just, to me, shows real leadership. Even Alaska, I was saying, has separate reopening plans for districts that consider themselves to be low risk, medium risk, and high risk. So it just is leadership. And I totally understand local control. And my version of local control is the household, is letting parents be the locus of control. But there are times, like pandemics, when what you need is leadership. And you need somebody to say, you know, in the beginning when the schools shut down, basically Basye's website was like, we just encourage all the districts to give kids plenty of opportunities to learn. It was sort of like a get out there and do your best. And that's not leadership to me. So my question is, if you're not leading, do we need this? Not to say we don't need, do we need this organization or this organization in this format, if what they're doing is sort of like a center of communications to pass through administrative memos, and they're not really leading? Because having looked at the websites of many small districts, I'm convinced that they are looking for leadership. We even have a quote from a superintendent when something happened. I think when the MAPS test got dropped, he was like, finally some leadership, all caps, exclamation points. And I know that they need that at this time. And so I would I would be much happier if Basye were leading the state and not just being a conduit of information.
So we have another
I
viewer.
totally agree.
Oh, wonderful. So we have another viewer question. So we were talking about some of the resources that it would be nice to have available to schools. We do have a question from parents. So the question is, what, if any, resources are available today to parents who are concerned about sending their child back into a classroom this fall? Anyone aware of something that we might be able to direct them to?
Well, they could start the MOCAP process, and they could go on MOCAP. I think that somebody's developing a microsite to help parents navigate that, but right now it's a little tricky because.
And could you explain MOCAP for maybe people who might not be familiar with MOCAP?
It's the virtual instruction program that used to be called the Missouri Virtual Instruction Program. Now it's the Missouri Course Access Program. And Basye has certified 10 providers of virtual instruction, at least one of which I'm familiar with has been around since the 90s. So these are people who are up the learning curve on virtual instruction, which does get a kind of a bad rap, but these people have worked through the kinks of how to offer virtual instruction, and they have programs ready to go. Right now, if a parent wants to enroll their child in MOCAP full-time, they have to get permission from districts. And there have been a few districts who have fought parents on this to the extent that parents have had to get lawyers in order to get access to what they are legally entitled to, which is MOCAP. So if a parent's thinking today, like, I didn't really like the virtual instruction and the Google Classroom, whatever it is that they did last spring, I'd like an actual provider of virtual instruction, so I'm going to just enroll in MOCAP, they might be disappointed to find out that their district has 30 days to get back to them, and it's July 9th. So we're talking mid-August before you may even have an answer, and you might have to fight. So that, to me, I think is a regulation that could be waived. The governor's been waiving some regulations, and the commissioners waived some regulations. That permission thing could be waived now. But unfortunately, that's, as far as I know, the only option for parents. And if you decide you don't want MOCAP or what your district's doing, you're in trouble. But again, I think there's an opportunity. The funding, I understand, is a problem, but to give parents direct scholarships, many states are doing safety scholarships for parents, and I think Missouri should consider following suit.
How does that work?
Coming up. Oh, go ahead.
How does the safety scholarship work?
So the money is given to parents in an account directly, and they can use it to access private education. And Pennsylvania has a safety scholarship that they've enacted. The question is the cost, right? So if that student's still going to be counted at their district under a hold harmless and get funding, typically the funding is half or less of state funding. So $3,000, something like that. So the student actually costs less. But if we're going to stick with the hold harmless, they might be double counted. But as you may realize, a recent Supreme Court ruling has now sort of opened up the door so that states can fund scholarships for parents to use at any private school of their choice. So that there's no longer that blockade in place. I think that would be an important, maybe if there's another round of education stimulus funds, we could consider that for scholarship funding. But I think that it's going to be important. I do think there'll be a lot of parents who are unhappy with their choices this fall.
Well, look, we're butting up against the end of our time here, so I want to give everybody a chance to get one sort of last word in. So sort of as we're looking forward, if there are any sort of parting thoughts you would like to leave our viewers with. We'll kind of go around the horn. So maybe Senator O'Loughlin, if you want to go first, and then we'll have Representative Basye and then Dr. Pendergrass.
Well, I have to say I've learned more from this conversation than almost any conversation with Basye. So, if I can 20-minute conversation and learn this much, think what I could learn in an hour. I mean, I'm for parents to decide what's best for their children. And I've talked to school districts who feel that they do an excellent job and they're not concerned about that kind of thing. So, my goal is to kind of put all of that together and try to raise the standard in all of the schools. And I think this fall is going to be a challenging situation, but I appreciate what I've learned today and I will use it. And if there's a parent on here who has a problem with the school, if they contact me, I will help you work that out.
Awesome. That's great. Representative Basye.
Well, yeah, I want to thank you all for the opportunity. I think this is a great thing that we participated in today. And I want to keep reiterating, I think what we should try to focus on is what is best for the parents, because the parents know best for their children. And if we just need to try to keep pushing for more opportunities for parents to make a decision on what they want to do for their kids' education, whether it's private, parochial, public schools, homeschool, whatever it might be. So I wish we could focus on that. And I think this is a great opportunity to do that. And I'm going to try and reach out to the governor's office and see if we might be able to have a special session on an educational issue, and especially with the recent Supreme Court decision. I think it's a great opportunity to move forward on that and get something done. Thank you again.
Thanks. Susan, you get the last word.
Nice. So normally when I talk to people about parents wanting choice, I kind of have to convince them with like survey data that says parents want choice, parents want control. I don't think that's going to be the case this fall, because I think parents are going to start getting a lot louder. We do know that they were giving, they were sort of they were conceding in the spring that it was hard for the schools, but I think if schools don't step up and offer them like a true education for each of their children, not something different for their third grade or fifth grade, like they don't really feel like they're getting an education, I think we're going to hear from parents. And so I think what's going to happen is change will come from the ground up this time, because there's a lot of unhappy parents and a lot of parents who are waiting, and it's midsummer and they still don't know what's going to happen, which is not making them happier. So I do think that we will, I'm a researcher. I keep saying, talk to me in 5 years. I'd love to do a debrief on this. It's hard to do in the middle of it, but that's what I think, is that we're going to hear from a lot of unhappy parents this fall, and it's going to force change, and the change is going to be a good thing.
Well, look, thank you all so much for taking the time today. Thanks to all of our viewers, those of you that are watching live, those of you who submitted questions. I would obviously, as always, plug the Show Me Institute's website, not just for education content, but for all things Missouri public policy. It's www.showmeinstitute.org. Thanks again, everybody. Stay safe out there, and let's hope this weather cools down a little bit, or at least we get a little bit less humidity, because I'm looking at Representative Basye there, and I want to be outside too. So take care, everybody. It was great to spend this time with you.
Thank you.